Hey everyone, and welcome back to r/EntitledPeople. As usual, it's time to enjoy some more Reddit posts about some real unhinged people. So let's get right into it. Made an entitled and sexist coworker eat his own words. I just told this story at a gathering over the holidays when a family member asked if I, a female, experienced sexism while serving in the military. On the whole, I had a great experience serving, and most of my coworkers were really amazing. Except for Brad. Fake name. Brad was the living worst. He was a lazy know-it-all, but really only a know enough to get by and keep up appearances, misogynist. During our first in-office interaction, he leaned back and said, totally unprompted and completely out of context, "Yeah, I've never met a woman who is smarter than me." To which I immediately replied, "That's weird, because I've met a lot of women smarter than you." Thus began our Cold War. Part of our job was to maintain a certain level of knowledge and proficiency among an array of different topics and specialties. We had a whole book that we were more or less supposed to know front to back. Because this was part of my job, I made sure to stay proficient. Not everyone thought this was important. Now Brad, the smartest person in the room, was in the training shop and was in charge of creating and proctoring our weekly proficiency and knowledge tests. A test which I aced every week, scoring higher than the males, who did not care that I scored higher, and even catching errors that Brad would make. Brad's fragile ego could not allow him to admit that me, a woman, knew even more than the other men, and sometimes even more than Brad himself. So he would find arbitrary reasons to fail me every week. Didn't like the specific color of blue ink I was using. Fail. Didn't like that I abbreviated my rank when signing the test. Fail. Didn't think I put enough thought into choosing the multiple choice answer. Fail. Walked into the testing room before him, thus invalidating my test results. Yes, literally. Fail. We all laughed off this behavior because he was only making himself look insane, and my unit commander saw that I was getting all of my test questions correct. Again, it was my job to know that stuff. So he was unfazed by my 0% scores. Not to mention, this was all internal testing, so no one outside our org ever got the results. Not really a big deal. Until Brad decides that he needs to nitpick a non-issue. He decides that instead of doing his weekly test, he was going to spend the hour lecturing us on how to properly classify presentations. Evidently, a female in the office had misspelled a classification on a slide. Think unclassified with one S versus two S's, thus creating a, quote, major security breach. She didn't. Now, don't get me wrong, using proper classifications is incredibly important and is top priority in creating a presentation. But the difference between secret with one T and secret with two T's is not going to bring down the establishment. Most people, except for Brad evidently, can use common sense and know that a slide marked secret with two T's should still be treated as secret, because duh. On to the petty revenge. Brad made a ponderous presentation, including slides that actually included an array of different classified material. This presentation was supposed to take all hour. By the 5th or 6th slide, however, we get to some really sensitive information. And what has been missing from every single one of Brad's slides? You guessed it, a classification on the top and bottom of the slide. Brad had just spent 15 minutes teaching to a room full of adult professionals how important slide classifications were and how essential it was to have them on the top and the bottom. Now, should I have made a note and approached him with a presentation? Maybe, but did I? No. I got my petty revenge. So I waited until he took a pause between slides and said loudly from the back of the room, "Hey Brad, maybe next time you want to teach us how important it is to classify a slide, you might want to actually classify your own work. You've got some sensitive information on there that isn't classified, which you just explained to us is a major security breach and should be reported to the commander. None of your slides have had classifications up to now. Unless this presentation is an example of what you don't want us to do?" Shocked Pikachu face. Brad looked like a trout gasping for life as he glanced at his computer, to me, then back to the screen. Everyone started laughing, and two of our superiors actually got up to leave, saying they had things that were actually important to get to. Sometimes the best revenge is just knowing how to do your job and do it well, despite the Brads of the world. It really does seem like that the people that are the most vocal about how great they are the ones that are actually not too sure about themselves, so they're really just trying to compensate for something. I mean, if he really thinks he's so much smarter than every woman he's ever met, then why would he have to go out of his way and try really hard just to find a mistake that a woman made? It's almost as if he doesn't believe his own words. So this next post here is an update for a story that we read in a previous video, but it's actually more of a part 2 than just a small update. If you haven't heard the first part, the link to that video will be down in the description. But if not, no worries, I'll give you a quick recap before we start. So in the first story, OP is working as an exotic dancer in a club. Her ex-family showed up, including her ex-husband and in-laws. They didn't respond well to finding out that she's an exotic dancer, so they kind of freaked out about it and basically climbed onto the stage and tried to pull her off, saying that she's bringing shame upon their family and whatnot. Her ex-husband Bill then got arrested, and now OP is trying to file for a restraining order against them. And that brings us to part 2. Ex-mother-in-law got arrested. For the people new to my story, I am a magnet for entitled, crappy, and psychotic people. I don't know what it is about me that draws them in, but they flock to me like moths to a flame. In my last post, you all read about how my ex-in-laws and ex-husband Bill showed up to my job during the biggest event of the year. I am an exotic dancer and bartender at my current job. My ex is bitter that I am now in the best shape of my life, and I look damn good compared to when he and I were together. I am dating an amazing guy named Kyle, and my kids are doing great. On to the crazy. So after my ex-in-laws were banned from my job, I sought the counsel of an attorney. I didn't want to wait it out anymore in hopes that they would just go away like I have in the past. I'm going for the jugular with this, so to speak. I filed for an emergency restraining order, citing my kids and I aren't safe around ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband. Ex-father-in-law is just a shell that lets ex-mother-in-law get away with stuff and doesn't put her in her place. My restraining order was granted temporarily within 24 hours, thanks to all of the evidence I was able to provide. My ex-in-laws and Bill both were served that very same day. We had a hearing on the 23rd, where I was able to plead my case, and the judge got to see all of the evidence I had, proving why Bill and ex-mother-in-law are dangerous for me and my kids. Ex-mother-in-law tried to pull a classic tactic of crying and wailing whenever I talked, so the judge would have to stop the proceedings to tell her to shut the f*** up. Eventually I got through what I wanted to say, and showed what I wanted. Then ex-mother-in-law and Bill were given the chance to say their piece. Ex-mother-in-law shushed Bill, and completely stuck her foot into her mouth by blabbering on about religion, and how God is judging me for not coming home to my husband's rule. The man is the Lord, while the woman is the subservient slave to his will, and I will burn in hell for not honoring our marriage. The judge reminded her that Bill and I are legally divorced. An ex-mother-in-law shouted at him that no power on earth has the right to sever a marriage that is morally and spiritually binding forever. I was chosen to be Bill's wife by God, and I will honor it or there will be consequences. The judge asked her what she meant. An ex-mother-in-law tried to play coy and said, "OP will see." The judge then asked Bill to say his piece. Bill looked uncomfortable. He tried to stand up, but ex-mother-in-law grabbed his arm and told him to sit down. The judge threatened to hold her in contempt, and she let go, grumbling at him. Bill then stood up and moved away from ex-mother-in-law. He started ranting about how crazy she is, and he didn't want to be there. He thought he could manipulate me into sleeping with him, but he got tossed out on his ass when he tried, and he gave up then and there. Ex-mother-in-law is the one that is doing all of this, and he wants no part of it anymore. His life is ruined because everything he has done has been in an attempt to appease her, and it has blown up in his face. He then begged the judge to uphold the restraining order, because ex-mother-in-law has told him that she plans to hurt me if I didn't comply with her demands. He said she was dangerous and unhinged, and suggested she needed some kind of psychological help. Ex-mother-in-law was effing speechless, but one couldn't deny the look of absolute guilt plastered on her face. Turns out she does need psychological help. Ex-father-in-law stood up and asked to say a few words. The judge agreed because he looked to be entertained by the three-ring circus playing out in front of him. Ex-father-in-law went up to stand beside Bill and confessed to the judge that ex-mother-in-law is suffering from the effects of dementia, and it has been a closely guarded secret between them for the past 2 years. Ex-mother-in-law was receiving treatment, but stopped when Bill and I moved away from the old state. Since then, she has gotten worse, and he fears what she will do if left allowed to roam free. They have always been religious, but when ex-mother-in-law stopped treatment, she began experiencing psychotic episodes and delusions of grandeur. He also confessed that if I had agreed to let them take my youngest to Greece, ex-mother-in-law had no intention of bringing him back. My jaw hit the floor. Ex-father-in-law looked at me and pled for forgiveness for not putting a stop to the insanity sooner. Bill also apologized for the hell he had put me through, stating he had been an idiot and hoped I could forgive him. Everything seemed to fall into place and things made sense. I never mentioned it, but I did notice whenever I saw ex-mother-in-law, she would be forgetful, stare off into space. She seemed confused at times, and sometimes she didn't know who people were. I thought it was an act to avoid dealing with people. It was then I heard ex-mother-in-law shrieking. She got up and ran at ex-father-in-law and began beating on him until the bailiff pulled her off of him. She was put into cuffs, and the judge ordered her to undergo 90 days in a psychiatric treatment facility. She screamed, wailed, and kicked as she was carted out of the room. The restraining order was granted for a year. I was completely numb and had no reaction when the verdict was given. I was confused and gobsmacked out of my mind at what all I had just heard. I almost don't believe it even happened, and wondered if that edible I ate beforehand to calm my nerves was screwing with my head. I spoke to ex-father-in-law after court. He is still taking Bill back home to the old state to help him get back on his feet. He promised me he and Bill will never bother me again. And once ex-mother-in-law is released, he will ensure she doesn't either. I went home and hugged my kids, and we went out to look at Christmas lights that night. Side note, Christmas was great. Hope yours was too. In a final act of toxic, entitled parenting, mom may have killed dad, and others too. Fast background. My mother divorced my father and kicked him out of the house, with police in play, about a year after he was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's, using false accusations of threatened violence. She then spent the next few years lying to his friends and family and trying to insist that unless we spent the same number of minutes with her as we did with him, we were taking sides. Add to this risky behavior with my own children in those same early years. She was caught outside in the garden on the far edge of our property, chatting on the phone with her lawyer for over an hour once, when she was supposed to be watching my toddler and infant, who she had abandoned and locked in the house. After which, we never allowed unsupervised visits until the girls were old enough to fight back. And an insistence on gaslighting, and refusal to accept the boundaries we put on our life. And after a year of therapy at her request, where all she did was try to rewrite my history, and try to justify every inappropriate comment, and attempts all throughout my children's childhood to get them out of your false web and into her own mythos, which confused the hell out of them, until they too were old enough to see how manipulative and entitled her behavior really was, and included episodes like her refusing them food that they could eat safely, but only giving them access to food that exacerbated their Crohn's disease, and then refusing to find them bathrooms until they crapped themselves in public, and then complaining that they made the whole New York City trip ruined for her, which made that the only time she was ever allowed to even see them unsupervised as teenagers. These days, all 4 people of my household, which are my spouse, 49, my daughters, 20 and 17, and me, also 49, we now severely limit our access to one closely guarded visit a year. But we had planned on seeing her in a public place for lunch next Tuesday during the holidays to exchange gifts for an hour, until she sent an email today to let us know that she had tested positive for COVID 2 days ago, after visiting my father in the nursing home 4 days ago, which she is not supposed to visit in the first place. But let me check my notes. Snuck in without signing in, under the pretense of being the visiting friend of one of my father's oldest friends. This took me a while to track down, but the nursing home front desk is amazing. Even though I have made it clear to her over the past few years that he has put her on the no-visit list, and that enforcing this is my job, by contracted, legal agreement. This has left me holding medical proxy and power of attorney for a 77-year-old shell of a man, 20 years post-Parkinson's diagnosis. Calling the nursing home to discover that she never even called them to report her positive status, neither on Wednesday when she learned of it, nor today when she notified the family via mass email. So now they test him 2 days later than they would have, which has compromised his care severely. They were attributing this morning's fever and cough to a UTI, which is common for him in this current state, and may have caused the infection to spread in a nursing home. Also, of course, now I cannot go visit him over the holidays, because she has caused his entire ward to go into quarantine lockdown. And to be fair, this was likely to have been my last visit with him being aware enough to register that I was there, given his disease's current state. And no, phones and Zoom no longer work. If I ever see you again, or if you go near any of my family again, I'll take whatever jail term results. Alright guys, that's it for today's stories. Thank you so much for watching, as always, I really appreciate it. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed, and also subscribe to the channel for more Reddit shenanigans. So take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.